Madam President, last night President Obama had the opportunity to present to the American people a plan and vision for how he intends to strengthen the state of our union. While I'm pleased he finally turned his focus back to the ongoing jobs crisis in our country, I was left feeling disappointed and frustrated that the President continued to call for higher taxes to pay for more and more government spending. I don't believe the President acknowledges, or at least he didn't last evening, the seriousness of our debt and fiscal crisis. We are nearly $16.5 trillion in debt, and $6 trillion of that debt is from the President's spending over the last 4 years. And he now has 4 more years to go. Yet rather than tell the American people specifically how he will reduce this unsustainable debt, he once again pulled out the same tired playbook and made it clear that his basic fiscal plan is ever higher taxes, and almost an obsession with telling the American people, you're just not taxed enough. When we are taxed to death practically, and when you add up not just the federal, but the state and the local and the sales and the excise and the gasoline and the entertainment and all the other taxes that American people pay in their daily lives that cuts into their paycheck in a very significant way each week. The real question is the solution to our problem more taxes on the American people? Mr. President, you got your taxes. On the fiscal cliff debate, you had campaigned for this. You won the election. These were tax levels were going to expire, and with a massive tax increase on every American. We clawed back a significant amount of that to protect some of the lower paying income people. But you got your taxes, a ton of taxes. And now is the time to address the other side of the so-called balanced approach that you've been promising, spending reductions. Sadly, last night gave us no indication that the President is committed to leading on this critical issue and fixing our economy, and more importantly, getting more people back to work. Instead of detailing a plan to reduce the record-high debt, he outlined a liberal laundry list of new government programs and initiatives. I could almost hear the sound of a cash register in the background. Ka-ching, 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 with every new program that he put forward. Some of these ideas were worthy ideas, but we can't afford them. How are we going to pay for them? And the result is, because the President say in a most disingenuous way, that none of these initiatives will add a dime, he said, to the already unsustainable debt. Well, if it doesn't add a dime to the debt, and you're proposing all kinds of programs that are going to cost a lot of money, there's only one way you can pay for it, and that is to raise taxes or to continue to borrow money and put us in an ever deeper hole in debt, more obligated to our creditor with each day that goes by. Hoosiers and Americans across the country are taxed enough. Washington cannot keep asking hardworking Americans to dig deeper and pony up more money so that the federal government can spend more. The American people no longer are falling for that. Hoosiers tell me that they want to do their part to restore the fiscal health of this country. They want to do their part to help America become a better place and a more prosperous nation for their children and their grandchildren. They're willing to step up and do what it takes to help. But Hoosiers and the American people are not willing to be enablers to Washington's spending addiction. They want to see their lawmakers in this administration reform the outrageous, out-of-control spending, not continually call for ever higher taxes to spend forever greater spending coming out of Washington. Now, I have to say I was somewhat encouraged that the President mentioned he's willing to make modest reforms to programs like Medicare. Both Republicans and Democrats, I think, and believe, including the President, agree that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security represent the biggest portion and ever-growing percentage of government spending. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office recently reported that spending on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security and the interest on the debt for that spending will consume 91% of all federal revenues in 10 years. That then takes all the wind out of our sails in terms of those necessary functions of the federal government, like preparing adequately for our national security and defense, and a number of other things that the federal government is involved in that are essential functions. But with the mandatory spending eating up in 10 years 91% of all that we take in, we simply are not going to have the ability to pay for those programs. With 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day, we know that this status quo is unsustainable. We cannot afford to continue this way we are. These programs are in jeopardy. Programs are in jeopardy. We're not trying to take away the programs. We're trying to save the programs. They're in jeopardy, though, if we don't take steps now to restructure them in a way that will control costs and preserve benefits for current and future recipients. Hardworking Hoosiers and millions of Americans have spent a lifetime paying into these programs, and they rely on the health and security benefits that they receive from them. But these benefits will not last if we ignore the facts about the current fiscal status and insolvency that these programs are careening toward and do nothing. So I was glad the President at least acknowledged that we need to, quote, make modest reforms, and I think we can do that. And the reason why we are dealing with this across-the-board sequester, and the reason why we are talking about potential cuts that have to be made is because we have not had the courage and the will to stand up and recognize and acknowledge that it's the mandatory spending reforms that in the long term will put us in a place of fiscal health so that we can continue the effective and essential functions of the federal government. According to the International Monetary Fund, to cover current obligations for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, our younger generation, our young people, will either have to pay 35% more taxes or receive 35% lower benefits. Those are the facts. Do the math, do the arithmetic. This isn't ideological. This isn't Republicans versus Democrats, liberals versus conservatives. This is pure numbers, pure math. It's an unsustainable course, and it's going to result in a massive decrease in benefits for those who pay into those programs over a lifetime, or a massive increase in taxes on those who have to have that deducted from their paycheck and put into these programs in order to keep them solvent. So we've got to deal with that problem and deal with it now. We should have been dealing with it years ago. We've seen this train wreck coming, and it's getting ever closer. Now it's time for the President, having recognized the need to address this issue, now is the time he needs to show the American people he's willing to lead, not from behind, but from the front, and offer a specific plan to reform and strengthen our health and retirement security programs. The President said this sequester across the board, everybody gets nicked, is a terrible idea. Well, it was his terrible idea. And it's not the best way to address our spending plight. It's not the best way to deal with this, because it basically says every program is of equal value, that what is spent to provide security for the American people by having an adequate and strong military is at the same level of some program that has been proven years ago as being totally dysfunctional and not working. And I will be laying out a number of things, as others have, as Senator Coburn and others have, in terms of those programs, not that we think ought to be eliminated or trimmed or don't fall into an essential category in terms of the role of the federal government, but what the nonpartisan agencies like Congressional Research Office, General Accounting Office, or even the President's own Office of Management and Budget have recommended that these programs are not worthy of the support they receive because they're not an essential function or they're dysfunctional. So we don't have to delve into an across-the-board sequester, which we have no choice to do but now because we've failed to live up to what we needed to do, and I'll be talking about that later, as I said. Mr. President, in closing, I urge you to focus on fixing our country's fiscal health. We don't do that by raising taxes. You do it by enacting bold spending reforms. You do it by reducing our debt. You do it by creating a budget so we can live within our means. And you do it by promoting growth, growing our economy. And a growing economy can solve a lot of problems and get a lot of people back to work. This is how we strengthen America, and this is how we get Americans back to work. And it's time we got to work in accomplishing this task that lies before us. Now, not later. No more deferrals. No more pushing it down the road. Time to step up now. And as the President said, putting the interest of our country ahead of our own personal political interest. Rising above the political to do what's right for America. That's the challenge, Mr. President, and we need your leadership. With that, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a